No.
Jamila's
You,
always not eating. I
not
think we are
because I don't
live.
want to.
Okay, I think we're live, but we can continue that, finishing off of that. So welcome to Shifting from Grudge to Grit, Grace, and Gratitude. We are joined with my co-host Jamila, and what we were saying before we just went live is that I'm always checking in. Has she eaten lunchtime? And okay, I'm just as bad by now. Sometimes I
Yes.
haven't eaten lunch, and sometimes even breakfast. It's naughty of us. But certainly happy to be here and hold this space, this beautiful space with Jamila and Deva. I think we were supposed to have you on a few months ago, but a hurricane swept through, and we just briefly met for the first time. I think you said you're from Dominican Republic,
It's where
if
I'm
I'm
currently
correct.
living, yes.
Where she's currently, and I mean, we were talking about the weather, and we were talking about life can be beautiful, and she's living on a beautiful island, but it also has the destruction. And so I think it's pretty apt that our topic today is about embracing self-care through grief, because there can be grief with these sort of natural disasters as well, amongst many other things, right? So before I go and introduce the topic, I'm going to hand over to Jamila to say hi, and then I'll again come back to you, Diva, and then
Sure.
we'll introduce again your bio and everything to the audience.
Thank you
Go
so
for it.
much, Anissa. Thank you. And thank you, Deva, for giving us this hour of your time on a Friday. What time is it in the Dominican?
It's about 9:30 in the morning.
Ah, okay. So you're
Oh,
starting your day and we midway through. Well,
Yes.
a little bit more than midway through our day and welcoming the weekend. I'm sure many of us can't as it's a thank God it's Friday. But they seem to be
mhm.
coming so fast and furious. You finish off with a weekend and before you know it, in the blink of an eye, it's Friday again. And we've
Yes.
forgotten to eat our breakfast and our lunch, Anissa. Yes, and I'm glad that you acknowledge that it's not just me, but you as well. But yeah, anyway, like I said, we're just so happy to have you, Deva, and happy that you're in one piece and not too much of destruction with the hurricane. And with that, I think we'll leave it to Anissa, I think, to introduce Deva.
Yes. So without further ado, I think just for the topic, we're going to be embracing self-care through grief. We know that it's an inevitable part of our lives, but learning to nurture ourselves through this can be very empowering. So this is what our expert and through her own lived experiences is going to share with us today. So a little bit about her. She's worn many hats over the years, including spending 20 years in the classroom teaching music, French, and running her own performance academy to young, up and coming singers and actors. How beautiful. Life changed drastically for Deva when she lost her brother in 2013 to suicide. I'm so glad we are going to be talking about this topic. The trajectory of her life catapulted her into realms she wasn't expecting. On her grief journey, she tapped back into a gift she had since childhood, and it was her brother who helped her get it back. Diva is now a psychic medium and grief coach, helping others on their grief journeys, teaching people that death is not a finality. Diva now helps, well, yeah, right, tap into their own intuitive abilities to learn how to communicate with their departed loved ones, sealing the gap between the human and the spirit worlds. So, on that note, Diva, as we said, we're going to flow with you today. Start wherever you want to with your story. This is your platform today.
Sure. Well,
Welcome.
thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's a great topic. It's always difficult to find gratitude in the midst of grief. And grief can come in all forms. It's not just losing somebody to death, it's divorce, it's losing a job. There's so many things that we have to understand. We grieve, and our process in how we do that is similar depending on what the situation is. But everybody's grief journey is different. And mine was exactly that. it was tumultuous. It got ugly for a long time, and I didn't think I was going to make it out of it alive, to be honest. And when you suffer a tragedy as such as my family had experienced, how do you put the pieces back together when your whole world has crumbled down around you? And so I was in a really dark place for probably about 7 years, where I was really struggling. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I mean, there were subsequent traumas that I had experienced after my brother's death as well. And that included losing the majority of my family. And, that isn't uncommon when we lose somebody, especially in a traumatic way, the way we lost my brother. And it's a lot of people trying to process grief, and of course everybody comes to it from different levels of consciousness, and there's guilt attached, and there's all kinds of things people are trying to process. And I always say hurt people, and that's exactly what was happening. So I felt like I was being kicked while I was already down. And so I struggled with suicidal ideation throughout those 7 years. So every day for me was just a struggle to stay alive. And, it became living in the moment, because I couldn't think of tomorrow. I had to just get through today, or just get through this hour, this minute. And, it really helped instill in me an appreciation and a value for being in the moment, which is hard to imagine when you're just struggling to stay alive in that moment. How later we can look back and go, yeah, I understand the importance of being present and being in the moment. I can't control what happened yesterday, nor do I have that control for what happens tomorrow. All I can control is right now in this moment. And so it really sort of set me up on this course of self-discovery. And there was a paradigm shift for me in that process that really shifted everything for me. And I was part of many trauma groups and many support groups. And one in particular, I was looking at one day, somebody had asked the question, how long have y'all been dealing with PTSD? And I was skimming through people's comments, just curious, as we are when there are other like-minded people going through what we're going through. And one jumped out at me, and it rocked me to my core. This woman said 43 years and counting. I knew in that moment that could not be my story. I would not survive that. And it was in that moment I made a decision that I needed to do anything and everything I could to heal, or I wasn't going to make it out alive. I could not live what that woman was living. I could not imagine living, another 30, 40 years dealing with the severe symptoms of PTSD that I was dealing with. I just didn't have I didn't have the stamina to get through it. It's exhausting. And so in that moment was a mindset shift for me. And so what I did was literally look for anything and everything I could that was going to help me heal. And so I tried everything. I did yoga, I did meditation classes, I went to a course on angels, I did a soul coaching course, I did my Reiki level 1, because I thought if nothing else, I could at least try and heal my own energy. And so I was literally trying whatever I could to see what fit. And so looking back, and people have asked me, well, what worked? I don't know. I don't know what one thing worked. I think it was a culmination of all those things. But I think more than anything, it was that mindset shift. For me, I think it was that deciding that I needed to do whatever I could to get better. And it worked. And so in a lot of ways, it forced me to go inward. And I think that's what we're really afraid of when we're struggling. And that's the thing we need most. We need to go inwards. It's not about fixing the exterior, because there's so much that we can't fix or change. the only thing we can change or fix or work on is ourselves and internally. And so that to me falls into what we were just talking about, is self-care in grief, right? What does that look like? Well, it comes down to honoring what you need in that moment, and that can change from day to day. But we start to self-evaluate, and we start to see and understand ourselves differently. And so for me on that quest, I really did start to get to know myself. And I think for the first time ever in my life, I started to truly value myself, and I started to truly love myself. And that was an interesting journey for me, because I didn't think any of that was possible, or I didn't think I needed it. But it's funny, life tears us down to like bare bones, nothing. And we realize the things that we had been missing before. And so now I look at my life and I think my brother's death quite literally saved my life, because I was ignoring the things that I needed to work on in myself. I was pushing down those childhood traumas and not dealing with some of the emotional dissonance of what that was in my life, realizing that my brother was doing the same. So how we were coping was very different, but we both had that to deal with. So I think my brother's choice to die really struck me hard, because well, as it would for anybody, you try to answer those questions, the why, the what could have been different had the circumstances changed. And so I really had to go inwards. And as humans, we don't like that. We don't like having to self-evaluate. We don't like having to look in the mirror and really dig deep. And so I really am grateful for my brother, in that it really did force me to go back and heal certain parts of my life, or start to understand what those parts were and what that really looked like, and to understand that some aspects of my childhood were not normal, but I didn't know it because that's all I knew. And so, I truly do find the gratitude, and I am grateful for the experience. And it really led me on this full circle moment. And I remember I would go to this coffee shop. I had moved back to my very small hometown in Southern Ontario, Canada. And that was a really healing thing in my journey. Just that alone, I had always promised myself that I would move back. It was the place I remember being the happiest. And so I moved out of Toronto. I was living in Toronto for many years. I moved back to my small town of Elora, and there were so many memories there with my brother that really helped me sort of reconnect with him in a way, but it also helped me reconnect with myself. And so I would go to this cafe frequently, and that's where I would go to write. And I was writing a book, and I was trying to put down on paper, sort of my process and that the discoveries that I was making. And I was sitting there writing about how we don't ever take the time to sit back and look around us. We're so focused on what's the next thing we have to do, what's the next thing on our to-do list. And as I'm writing this, saying we don't really stop and smell the roses, but stop and look around. Sometimes life is giving you messages and life is handing you things, and you're so focused on looking in one direction, you're not seeing what's happening around you. And so as I'm writing this, I'm like, maybe I should take my own advice. And I sat back, and I always sat in this corner table near the window. And I don't know, it was sort of my happy place. And the coffee was really good. The atmosphere was beautiful, and I sat back with my coffee and I thought, okay, I need to look around. What is happening around me? Who is around me? And as I looked around and I looked out the window, I started to cry because I had not even realized that inadvertently I had always sat at this table, didn't know why it resonated as much as it did with me. I just knew that that was my table and I felt good there. That's where I was productive. But when I looked out the window, my childhood home was right in view. Where I grew up was right outside the window in my eye line. And that's why I started to cry, because it literally, the energy of the universe brought me home. And it was where I remember being the happiest. It was where, I remember when my brother was born and we brought him home. It was where I was connecting to spirit as a child and, trying to explain to my mom what was happening there as well. And some of my earliest memories were telling her of this relationship I had with my, well, now I know is my guardian angel. And, just so much came flooding back to me in that moment. And it was so powerful. So I often say to people, do you often just stop, take a breath, and look around you? Because life is handing us gifts all the time. We just have to be willing to see it. And if we're too focused on one thing, we don't see what's going on around us. And so that was the beginning of me truly healing.
Deva, I'm listening to you and I'm listening to you in awe. And there's a common thread that I'm picking up on, a few threads. One is to come into presence and really relish every single moment. And not just because we're grieving or we desiring something, and so we're constantly on the go and doing lots of things. So that's one common thread. The second thread is that in the presence, we come back home to ourselves. Only when we are present,
yes,
can we do so. And coming back home to ourselves is that essence, that divine essence and that you had as a kid, but our parents don't know what they don't know. And so they only do the best that they can. But what I'm so, so amazed by is that you could find the strength without even having done the meditations and the Reikis and all these other types of interventions to get back to a thriving state. In your survival state, you found the wisdom somewhere, somehow, to know that you just got to live in that moment. And the differentiator here being not like we are living each moment and whatever the chaos is, and well, we'll take it, trying to keep yourself alive.
yes.
So that for me is profound.
Yeah, I agree, Anissa, with the theme of presence. And we miss so much when we're not present. And it can be done in mindful walking, mindful listening, mindful eating, but just taking the time to appreciate the little things, which are in effect the big things in life. And I think that it needs to go further than just being present, because we can get to that presence, but then it's about also doing the work and asking the questions. And how you mentioned, Deva, is about your happy place, going back to your happy place. But you've got to take yourself there. You've got to ask yourself those questions as to where was I most happiest. And sometimes it's not, it's mostly going back into your childhood and connecting with I think that inner child, which is so important, because we tend to forget all about that. And then just on on your loss, I've lost a brother as well. And with my brother, he was murdered, but he had a very challenging life within himself. He was an addict, and the circumstances under which he passed, were really, really awful. But I think from his death, what it taught me was never to come from a space of judgment over anybody, because we never, if you are not walking in somebody's shoes, you have no knowledge or understanding of the trials that they are facing.
Yeah.
And with issues of suicide and drug abuse and alcohol abuse, society tends to frown upon it, to judge those who are affected by it. And this is an important lesson that it taught me, because as a young girl, I was the youngest out of the family, and my brother had all of these challenges, with abuse, drug abuse, and alcohol abuse. And you take on generally what society, or how society looks at them. And that's the lesson that it taught me, is to really be kind, be mindful of what people are going through, and try to look at it from a lens of understanding rather than judgment.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because my brother struggled with the exact same, right? And so I feel like I did live in judgment somewhat, because when you're constantly dealing with somebody who's struggling with that, you're dealing with society's judgment on that as well. Even though it's not you, it correlates. And
Yes.
when I think of my family and the estrangement now, they famously say things like, "We know things," and I think, you know nothing. You have no idea what it was like in our house to deal with my brother and his struggles, right? And that's the thing, and it has really changed my view on addiction as well, especially in reconnecting with my brother like I have since his passing, and understanding that somebody who is deep in addiction, it's almost always as a result of unresolved trauma, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
medicated, self-soothing, trying to take away the pain, and dealing with suicidal ideation for all the years that I did as well. It really gave me an understanding of what people are struggling with, who are contemplating suicide. And what I try to explain to people is, it's not that someone wants to die. That's very rarely the desire. Really, it's a desire to disappear.
Mm.
It's just wanting the pain to go away. Like, the way I described it is, I wanted the world, or I wanted my bed to swallow me up and just take me
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. I think it's just that feeling of absolute and utter hopelessness.
Yeah.
Like, you've tried everything, you've done everything, and still, no matter what, you find yourself in that position. And there's just absolutely no hope for you. But in just to touch on, the issue about judgment, and especially judgment on people who have substance abuse, my view on it has totally changed, ever since losing my brother. And I realized that this is a disease unlike it's like any other,
Yes.
whether you are, diagnosed with cancer, whether you are diagnosed, it is exactly the same thing. It isn't something that anybody would wish on themselves.
Yeah.
And it is how, we should be approaching people who have this issue with so much of care and so much of understanding and so much of love, compassion, and empathy, as we would if we heard that someone was just diagnosed with cancer.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. I 100% agree that, and I've said this before as well, that mental illness can be terminal, just like
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
And we need to treat it as such. And yet there's still such a stigma. There's still a lack of understanding, compassion, empathy, and there's a lack of knowledge. And I feel, we've taken strides to get it out there, but at the same time, we're not putting things in place to protect people.
Yeah.
Yes, to protect and support them.
Yes.
That's one thing that I find, that that person's world is totally devoid of support of any kind.
Yeah.
And normally it escalates to such a terrible point where you want to push the person into rehab, but that's not the answer either.
No.
It's about making them feel comfortable enough to know that the support is there, nonetheless, that you're holding the space, and for them to take that step then into making that change for themselves.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I find, rehab is great. And there's a caveat to me saying it. It's a program that works. I think what doesn't work is what comes after. And witnessing
Mm.
my brother went through rehab 3 times, and he came out clean after his time in rehab. It's the support afterwards that is lacking,
Mm.
that makes it very difficult for them to continue what they learned in rehab without that constant support. So, when we take something like cancer as an example, you go through treatment and you get to a place where you're in remission or cancer free, but your time with the doctors doesn't end there, because you have to keep going back for checkups regularly to make sure that you stay cancer free. But I don't think those things are in place yet for people struggling with substance abuse. They go to rehab
Definitely, Deva.
and they're left to their own devices. And I think that's dangerous.
And I mean, you've touched on earlier on that when you came back home to yourself, it was facing yourself. If we're talking about why you came onto the segment, it is about that hero's journey, and facing that inner villain that you have to slay. And it's not, and at most times we're bearing the grudges, the resentment, and whether it is to our family, our siblings, and hence you're estranged from your family, and I have a few family members that I'm also estranged from for different reasons. But when you finally reconnect with yourself, you can hold that space because your pain has been witnessed, has been validated. For somebody who's just gotten, or who's coming up clean from substance abuse or alcohol, or let's not forget the other parts is also the self-harming that happens.
Yeah.
Right? I have a now 17-year-old, but for 2 years we were struggling with that. And ever so often I wonder, is it going to come back? Is the darkness is going to go away? Or is it there still? I don't think it ever goes away. Now, for somebody who's come out of that substance abuse and have just been on rehab, they haven't even dealt with the root cause of the pain. They've just come clean from the actual substance. So what
Yes.
you're referring to is, how do we then create an environment that holds that space so that people can be witnessed in their pain? So that they
Yes.
can feel like they're not alone, they're not isolated, or they're not being judged and shouldn't be seen as an outcast, so to speak. Because
Yeah.
that's really what happens, is that we go into that darkness and you feel like you're truly just the outcast. And if you are the outcast, oh well, you might as well continue behaving in that way. Hence, there's repetitive abuse against substance abuse,
Yes.
because we almost feel like it's expected. The person feels like it's expected of them. So, well, I'm already the black sheep, so I might as well just continue being the black sheep.
Exactly. If they're going to label me this, well, I may as well do it anyway because they're judging me regardless. Right. And I
Yes.
think it goes back to that self-soothing. And what's the quickest way? It's what they know.
Who did you have, Deva, on your side to hold that space for you to witness it, to validate your pain? Because you did all the interventions, but surely you had someone by your side or people by your side. Who was that in your life?
You know, it's interesting that you say it because I think one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves is create a network of people for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether we call it our tribe or our circle, whatever, it's a net group of people. And sometimes it's not who you expect. But I'm so fortunate that I have so many amazing people in my life who were able to hold space for me and who were able to support me through it, even though it got ugly sometimes. And so I attribute my ability to get through in having those core people. And so, you know, one person immediately that I think of is my mom. And in a lot of ways, we were having to support each other, both having to come to terms with losing my brother in the manner that we did and losing our family because she experienced that as well as a result. And, you know, two of my cousins were also there for me in that they went to bat for me. They stood up to my family and what they were doing to us and really validated for me that I wasn't the bad person they were trying to make me out to be. That was how they were dealing with their own guilt. They needed somebody to blame. And even still. And so the difference is, and the reason I bring this up is we just recently lost my grandmother in April, who was part of that. And I reconnected with her before Christmas of last year on her request because she knew she wasn't doing well and that death was imminent for her. And my mom and I both reconnected with her and rebuilt a relationship to some degree. And she was very apologetic for what they had done. And, you know, that was great. But after her death, my family came at me hard again, publicly on social media, saying horrible things. And one of my uncles, who was not part of the drama that was happening, stood up to them as well. And that was very unexpected for me because as much as he loved me and supported me, he didn't want any part of that family drama that had gone on. But this time he stood up for us and he said to them, they've moved on. You need to as well, because they are still in that same mindset as they were 10 years ago, where, you know, we're the bad ones. They're angry, they're volatile, and that was clear in what they were putting on social media in comments. I mean, they had to search me out to do it. And so they purposely set out to look for me to be able to spew this hate and this, whatever we want to call it, at me. And at first it was very jarring and it triggered me. But now looking at it, it's all they know. It's what they know. It's their knee-jerk reaction. And they want somebody to put their anger on. And that's me. I'm the chosen one. But I have so many people in my life who can validate that it's not me. I'm not the one who has caused all these problems that they seem to think are out and about. And this is where, you know, my grandmother even asked me, can you ever forgive me? And I said, I forgave you a long time ago. And I did. I forgave all of them because I realized that they were operating at a different level of consciousness. They were operating from this place of hurt, and hurt people hurt people. And so, you know, again, it's like I was tested having to relive some of that after my grandmother died and dealing with, again, family drama. And then I had to forgive them again. And I was almost resentful that they made me go through that process again. And what I realize is that it is a process. It will forever be shifting. We will forever be doing this work. And it can be frustrating as all get out. But the point is that we are meant to continuously reevaluate. And that is what helps us in our growth. And so I'm very fortunate that I have amazing people in my life who remind me of my worth, who remind me of the person that I am, and not to listen to the person they've decided I am. And so I encourage everybody, find your people who will stand up for you no matter what.
Yeah. Now, and I just want to speak about what you mentioned, how you feel like it can be frustrating to go through things, repeatedly. But I think that when we find our presence, we realize that we might be going through something that is seemingly the same or repetitive, but we are not. And the way that we respond to it is completely different from the way that we might have the previous time or the time before. And that in itself is an awareness of our growth. Which just reiterates the importance of just being in the presence, because then it allows you to make these realizations.
Yes.
Anissa, I am so keen to find out about how Deva Deva's brother helped her to realize her journey towards becoming a psychic medium. I'm like so keen to hear that. So if you could just share that with us, I'm sure that everyone that's listening as well is waiting.
I want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have to know a little bit about my brother's character. My brother was a bit of a jackass in life, and in that he was a prankster. And so a lot of us growing up was about pranking each other, scaring each other. We would hide in closets until one of us would walk into a room, and then we'd jump out and scare each other. So that's very much his mentality. And I say that as a precursor because now what I tell you will make sense. So for the longest time in my healing journey, I desperately wanted to connect with him. And he was showing me signs. I would be in random places and people out of nowhere, strangers, would say things to me like, your brother's here and he wants you to know. And I would be shocked because, again, they're strangers saying things to me. So, it was evident that my brother was trying to relay these messages to me. And, it was both helpful and harmful because, it would set me in this deep place of grief, missing him. But it was also reassuring. I knew he was there. And so it started to happen that I would be in bed. When you're in that state, you're not quite asleep, but you're not fully awake. You're sort of in that in between. And he would shout my name in my ear, and it would startle me awake. And so it happened quite frequently. And I would just think, I would pass it off as coincidence, or I was dreaming, or I was almost asleep. But it became quite jarring because, I'd hear my name in my ear, Deva, and it would startle me. And it happened so frequently that I couldn't pass it off anymore as just me dreaming. And it was happening on a daily basis. So I talked back to him. I'm like, really? That's how you're going to communicate with me? And it sort of opened the floodgates. And so it was it was as clear as if you shouted in my ear, right? That's how clear and audible it was for me. And there was one evening I was in a play. I was acting in a play, and after we had decided to go ghost hunting in the theater, well-known place in my hometown. My hometown is very haunted, just so you know, which growing up there and realizing my experiences there as a child really sort of just set the scene for, what was to come as for me as an adult. But we were ghost hunting in the theater that night, and we were having these amazing experiences, and things were moving, and it was awesome. But I got home that night, and my brother again shouted in my ear as per usual, and then I heard about 12 different voices. Oh, Deva. Hello, Deva. Deva. And I sat up in bed and I thought, that's new. And I wasn't quite sure how to deal with that. So I recognized that I likely had brought those spirits home with me. And I was like, thank you for, being with me, but it's time to go. and thus started my communication with spirit, right? Those 12 seemed to follow along, and then it opened me up. And so it was a long haul of me trying to sort of tap back in and understand what was happening. It was overwhelming at times. I had to set boundaries because spirit, when they know that you can communicate, they all come at you. I used to live by the old hospital in our town, and I would get bombarded every time I drove by. Like, it felt like thousands of spirits trying to come through. I would love to go and clear that space just because it is so overwhelming. And I find hospitals to be most overwhelming for me. People say, oh, you must hate cemeteries. I'm like, they're not really in the cemetery. Spirit is with us. They're not in the cemetery. But hospitals, nursing homes, places like that, there's a lot of activity. So it really set me off. My brother is the one who sort of set me on this journey of reconnecting. And, so I started to dive back into that part of myself. And I'm so glad I did. Again, it felt full circle. Like I came home and I started to really live authentically. And, it really helped me in being able to communicate with my brother. It helped me get answers, which really helped my mom and I. Not that we have all the answers, but it certainly helped us understand a little bit more of what happened that night, or his mindset of what was going on that night, the night he died. And so my goal has always been to try and help other people get those answers or find that closure, comfort, whatever they need in that moment. But more than anything, my goal is to help people realize that our connection to our loved ones doesn't die with them. Death is not a finality, right? The vessel, our human body dies, but our spirit, our soul never does. And we are forever connected. And so teaching people how to reestablish that relationship and that connection is important for me.
I'd like to ask you.
Okay,
You both just
go
want to
ahead.
go.
Go ahead, Anisha.
So I'm intrigued because, so if you don't know, okay, I'm even gobsmacked. I don't know where to start. This is the first time that I am speechless and I can't even count my words here. But I'm intrigued in a way to understand. So the other spirits is people that you don't know, right? So I'm kind of wanting to ask something which I'm not sure is the right question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So for people who don't know, the lineage, could you, as a psychic medium, know, like that stranger said, your brother's here, and he wants to connect with you, are you then able to connect people to who their family is if they've never met their dad? I'm talking about myself as an example.
Yeah.
If he's crossed over to the other spirit worlds, right? So I don't even know if he has or hasn't. But I'm really intrigued to understand. So is that something you can do to give people closure?
Yes, yeah. And I've been so fortunate to be able to do that on many occasions. It's very humbling for me. And I'll give you an example. I was at a wedding, and it was my cousin's wedding. Well, my cousin's daughter. So anyway, and her dad was there. And so I went to tell his wife and his daughters that he was there. He was telling me he wanted them to know that he was present, but he was holding a baby. And so I said to my mom, I said, "Why is Ernie holding a baby? He's showing me a baby." And my mom gasped, and she goes, "I was just talking to the bride's sister, and she told me that her other sister had just had a miscarriage."
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh." So, that evening I sent my cousin a message saying, "I didn't get a chance to tell you, and I know you're busy right now, but I wanted you to know that this happened." And I told her, and that, the baby was with her dad and all was well. And it was a girl. And I said, "You need to tell Jessica not to worry, that there's another one on the way."
Oh my gosh.
And my cousin messaged me first thing in the morning. She said, "You have no idea what you did to us last night." She said, "We didn't know." She said, "I told Jessica what you said. And on her way home that night, she just instinctually felt she needed to get a pregnancy test.
Oh
And
my God.
she was pregnant. She was
Oh,
pregnant. And she had not told
that's
anybody.
ridiculous.
She had suspected she may be pregnant, but hadn't tested yet. And my message to her and saying, "Don't worry, she is with your grandfather." Like, her grandfather had showed me that he was holding the baby, and that not to worry, that there will be another one on the way. And she had had fertility issues, which was part of the reason why that message was coming through. So for her that night to go and get a pregnancy test and find out she was pregnant, they were all gobsmacked. They couldn't believe it. I was gobsmacked. I was just delivering information that I was getting, not knowing what was happening in their world. And so to find that out all within that day, that was pretty amazing. So I've been
Yeah, that is
helping people that way.
Oh my
amazing. And
God.
tell me, Deva, how does it work? I mean, if you're having a session with someone, do you call on people that they want, like, or do people just appear?
Both. Both. So when I do a session with anybody, I always say to them, we can ask to connect with anybody you want. We can ask any questions you want. Doesn't mean that will always happen, because spirit will always give us what we need, not always what we want. And so
Yes.
I preface our reading with that in mind, that we can ask for certain people to come through. I can never guarantee it. It's very rare that somebody won't show up. But as an example, a lot of spirits, my family who has passed, have come to me. My grandmother has not. She has not stepped forward to me, nor has my father. And that, I think, has to do with their own guilt, their own issues of
Yes.
things. They do not come forward to me. And even with other people I know who are mediums, they will not talk to me. They're present, they'll be there, but they have no words to communicate. Whereas my great uncle just passed the other day, and immediately he came to me and showed me that he was with my grandfather and his other brother, the three of them, three musketeers. And I was able to tell my one of my cousins, whose father was one of the three, and tell her, yeah, they're all together. they're together. They let me know that.
Deva, must you be in the physical realm, or can you also see this in the virtual realm? Because everything has become so virtual. But energetically, it doesn't matter. Well, in my understanding, energetically, it wouldn't matter. But do your work mainly consist of being physically with the person?
No,
Or okay,
no, I work
okay,
with a lot of
very
people
interesting.
online. Yeah. Yeah, I've done house clearings of people in other countries. A friend of mine and I, we often do clearings or readings of people's houses where things are happening, or people's businesses even. And I don't have to physically be in the room to understand what's going on.
How intriguing, right, Jamila? This is like super intriguing.
It's super intriguing, and I'm being very, very careful here because, as you know, both Anissa and I are Muslim, and this is literally, a little bit frowned upon,
Yes,
Anissa. But
I know.
nonetheless, it's so intriguing. It's so intriguing
Yes,
because we also all have our. I mean, from so many people that I've met in our space, other mediums as well, who say that this is what this is what we all intuitively are born with. We're
Yes.
born with the ability, but not all of us um, choose to tap into that. But I'm
yes.
sure, Anissa, you've had experiences, I've had experiences, where it's like you say, you kind of feel like you're in a dream, but when you wake up, it almost felt so real, where you've connected with
Mm-hmm.
someone, or maybe you've had the scent of a beautiful scent of somebody who has, just passed away. But we've all had our little experiences, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like there's so many questions you want to ask
Yeah.
because I do find it really intriguing. Tell us a little
Yes.
bit more about the house clearings and what you do for businesses. How does that work?
Well, I'll give you an example. One of the businesses we went into, and they asked specifically because there were weird things that were happening, and they wondered if I could help with that. So I said, well, I can go in and see what's happening and see if I can fix it. So things that were happening was, things would be moved around in the night, and they would come in the morning, and things were in different places, and they were noticing that in their dining room, customers were getting agitated. There was a lot of agitation, and they didn't understand why. And so I went in, and a friend of mine, like I said, she and I did it together. And there was a person who worked there who was also present to help us answer questions if we had any. And there was so much that had happened in that building that I had to process. And even though I grew up in that town, there was a lot that I didn't know was happening or had happened. And so the first thing that I had experienced upon walking in, and I said it out loud, I said, there was gambling here. I said, there is blood on the floor. So I'm getting like secret society, money was exchanging hands. It wasn't always on the up and up. And like almost that there was some kind of like maybe cockfighting or something. Like there was literally blood on the floor, was my sense. And the woman who worked there said to me, she goes, well, this used to be a billiards place 40 years ago. And I said, no, I did not. I had no idea. And so there was just a lot of stuff that we were picking up, but there was some residual spirits that were hanging around that we helped cross over. And one of them was a little boy, and this little boy was waiting for his parents. So he was going
Oh,
table to table trying to find his parents. And I got the sense that maybe that was the agitation that people were feeling. They were feeling uneasy or uncomfortable, was because there was literally a spirit coming to their table on a regular basis. And so we ended up reconnecting him with his parents and helping him. But one thing that he had told us is, that there was a problem with the fridge. So I asked the woman who worked there, I said, are you finding the fridge open? She goes, yes. She said, every morning we come in, the fridge is left open and we don't understand it. And we're worried that the food is going bad. And I said, okay, because he's saying he's doing that to make you take notice that there's something wrong with the fridge. So this little boy was opening the fridge every night so that they would look and see. And sure enough, there was something wrong with the seal of the fridge that they had to
Oh my
fix,
gosh.
which the food would perish and could possibly,
Yes.
make people sick. And so we there was a store at the front of the restaurant as well. And, I'd commented, I said, do you come in and things are faced? Like, it's almost like somebody has taken everything and pulled it up to the front. She said, yes. And I said, I'm getting that this spirit is like a father figure. And he goes, I have to work. I have to keep working. So I said, I get the sense that he either worked here before or maybe it was his store, but it's important that he's here. Sure enough, the father of the owner was the original owner, and he was always facing the shelves. He was always trying to make things look nice. Well, he was doing that in spirit as well, right? He was trying to help his daughter.
But so I want to ask you, because given that the topic is about grief and self-care, I know we've swayed majorly off that topic, but why are these spirits floating around or hanging around? Is it because of their own grief that they haven't processed? Or
Some
what
of
is
it,
the purpose behind it?
some of it is like that little boy was waiting for his
Yes.
parents. There was some sort of separation and didn't know how to find each other or didn't know that they get stuck. And so, when we're able to go in and clear that and help them find that and reunite, then all is well for them, right? They go and they can clear that. So it gets very complicated. My understanding, we have this idea of what heaven and hell and purgatory and all these things that the church tells us, but that's not how it is. So my best way to describe it is that spirit of that little boy was in what we would consider purgatory. He was stuck. He wasn't quite crossed over. He hadn't fully gone home is how I my terminology. Um, and so we were able to reconnect. And there was another woman who was pregnant waiting for her husband to come back, or her fiance to come back from war, neither one knowing each other had died.
So I wanna bring it back, because I can't believe we've got 2.5 minutes remaining.
Oh,
We've
sorry.
got 2.5 minutes remaining. And I mean, we've just been fascinated, and it's been really interesting to hear. And I know, Jamila, it is sort of treading in terms of beliefs and faith practices. Different people believe different things. Whilst
Yep.
I do believe the spirits are around us, some of their souls aren't resting in peace for whatever reasons. But let's bring it back to grief. Grief is not linear,
No.
right? If we're talking about us in this moment here, in the present, and grief is not death only, grief is loss of income. It's a divorce, as you've mentioned. It's not getting a promotion. It's the estranged family. There are many forms that grief can take on. And sometimes it sneaks up on us so unexpectedly. So I'd love to almost bring it back to a closure, the conversation, to say, if that grief resurfaces each time, what are the self-care practices that you would recommend for our audience to consider, taking into account? And it's different strokes for different folks. I used to love journaling. I no longer journal.
Yep.
For me, it's the ocean now, just sitting at the ocean or looking at the mountain, and just sitting there makes
Yep.
me realize that what I'm grieving is minuscule in comparison. So if you can just share with us, what are some of those strategies and interventions or self-care practices we can use?
Well, I think you just tapped on it. It can be forever changing as well. Like you said, you used to journal, and I find that really helpful for a lot of people. And then sometimes we outgrow that. We don't need to write it down anymore. So how we deal with grief is just as nonlinear as grief itself. And so I always say to people, Do
Wow.
something that brings you even a small amount of joy. And if that's sitting and listening to the ocean, go and do it. If that's taking a hot bath, if that's baking because you find that soothing, if it's coloring, doing something that's mindful so that you're focused on something that takes you out of your head. It's all about finding that little ounce of joy. And what does that look like for you? And that can change over time too.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm actually
Yeah.
making a comment
I,
there about are both not linear. Okay,
yeah.
go for it. I'm
And
writing that.
Anissa, I just spoke to someone the other day, and they said that what they do, first of all, you've got to confront it. You can't just ignore it. And, especially when it's grief pertaining to someone who you've lost. And
Mm,
maybe like doing something or acknowledging something that they love to do in their lifetime, and partaking in something like that to celebrate them, to celebrate their lives. So we often think about our own grief, but if we have to think about the life of the person and how they live that life, and how
mm.
beautifully they live that life, and if we celebrate that, then it always has a different take on grief for us, helping us to move through those different phases of grief. What I would want to just speak on is, you mentioned that you would sit at this table and write. Is there a book? Is there a book coming up? Can you share that with us?
Yes, I have many in the works because I have all these ideas. And one is about tackling grief, right? And how we approach the steps we need to get through grief and acknowledging and processing and moving through that. So there are things in the work. There's nothing like in the near future. It's all things that I'm currently working on. But yes,
Mhm.
there are some things in the
Oh, we
pipe.
look
Keep
forward.
us posted.
We look forward to it. Please do keep us
I will.
in the loop about that.
One thing I did publish is a grief journal, and
Okay.
it's it's a guide. It's 30 days, and not that it needs to be 30 consecutive days, but it's 30
Hmm.
prompts, things to help, like you said, what are some things that we can do to celebrate that person's life. And I tried to look at it just like I look at everything that I do, is what could I have used back then that I would have found helpful. So I created the
Sure.
journal with that in mind. I I needed those prompts, or I could have used those prompts to help me perhaps face some things that I was worried to face, or that validated how I was feeling in that moment that I felt was wrong. Because we have this idea that society knows better than we do about how long is appropriate to grieve.
Mm.
And we need to throw that out the window.
Yeah, no, I
Absolutely.
agree with you.
We have a
And
comment
also, I
from Beth
think,
Jones. I just want to acknowledge Beth's comment, who will also be a guest in the not so distant future. Beth says, "Loved this discussion. So much resonates with me. I'll connecting with you, Deva." So
Oh,
thank you for
beautiful.
that. Can't wait to have Beth on. Beth looks like the right energy, and we can't wait to have you on board, Beth. So on this
absolutely.
note, I mean, we're on 1 hour, 3 minutes. I want to say thank you. Where can we find the journal, or where can our audience find that journal? Is it something
Well,
that they must order on Amazon or?
if you want a hard copy, then yes, you can order it on Amazon and it'll be printed and sent to you. If you want a digital copy, I give that away for free, and you can find that on my website.
It would be wonderful just to post that here, and then on the same LinkedIn event post. And then you can definitely post more of where they can find you. But we're really grateful to have shared this space with you. Do stay on, Deva. We normally just have a short debrief afterwards. For
Sure.
those that have been here, Sharif, Ashraf, and Avril, and whoever else have not showed up but is in behind the scenes on Instagram, thank you for joining us. Until next week, we will see you again. And thanks for always sharing your insights and comments, even if it's on the replay. So over to you, Jamila and Deva, to greet our guests.
Yes, thank you so much to all our everyone who forms part of our audience week in and week out. And I know that there's a lot of people who go to the recording, Anissa, and watch that. There's a lot that are unable to be here today, but definitely looking forward to the recording for this. Um, and yeah, thank you just again, Deva, for spending this hour with us, which has been way too short. And it's been so intriguing to listen to your story and to what you have. Now, this is your purpose, right? Because this is what you're meant to do. And how beautiful is it to be able to connect people with loved ones that they've lost, and to realize that the connection is always alive, irrespective of our understanding of seeing death as a finality.
Yes, yes. Thank you for
Beautiful.
having me. This has been an amazing experience, and I hope people can walk away feeling uplifted in some way, knowing that those relationships are forever there.
Oh, that's beautiful. On that note, I'm going to end the live on both sides, and then we'll just have our short debrief. Thank you.
Thank you.